listening, and my sincere appreciation to Hillsdale for their sponsorship.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
Hello, America. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. I was at two places last night with my wife. First in the Oval Office, where the president awarded the Medal of Freedom to former Attorney General Ed Meese, which was a magnificent ceremony. And it was wonderful to see the president and Ed Meese and Bill Barr and others who were in the room there, too many to mention. And also that night, last night, began Yom Kippur, the holiest of the holy holidays in the Jewish faith. But I'm back. I want to thank Brian Mudd, my buddy, for sitting in. This letter from the President's White House counsel is unbelievable. I'm sure it's been talked about, but not by me. I want you to look at Article 1, Section 2 in the United States Constitution. There's a lot in there, but Article 1, Section 2 in specific. Let me quote it to you in relevant part. The House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. Let me repeat that for Joe Scarborough, the slow learner. The House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. Not the Speaker of the House. Not one party in the House. The House of Representatives. You see, the intent, which has been followed 3 past times, is to involve the House of Representatives in an impeachment inquiry, and then obviously on an impeachment vote, if one should occur. That is why they had a vote on the floor of the House by all the members present when it came to the impeachment inquiry into Andrew Johnson and Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton. It is Nancy Pelosi who is lawless. It is Nancy Pelosi who believes that she's above the law. It is Nancy Pelosi who has politicized a constitutional process. And she's done great harm. And the president not only had no choice but to do what he did, he needed to do what he did in order to not just to protect himself, but to protect the office of the presidency, the Constitution, and yes, even the impeachment clause. Even the impeachment clause. Now, we've talked about this. And the president's White House counsel put together a brilliant letter, Pat Cipollone. And he points out, and the reason they won't have this vote, as we've discussed before, at least not yet, is in doing it this way, they deny the president the right to cross-examine witnesses, as Cipollone writes in his letter, to call witnesses, to receive transcripts of testimony, to have access to evidence, to have counsel present, and many of the other guarantees that have existed before for presidents of the United States. This isn't a court proceeding. It's not a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal proceeding. So there's not a direct parallel with such a proceeding, but there are direct parallels in past impeachment inquiries. Now, Nancy Pelosi says we're not required to do this under the Constitution, but she is. The House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. Well, Mark, we're going to have a vote ultimately on impeachment. That's not what that means. The entire process, the House of Representatives is supposed to be involved. They didn't want one party as a mob using the impeachment clause as a way to reverse the past election and to affect a future election so close to the general election. The general election, ladies and gentlemen, is less than 13 months away. It's less than 13 months away. I can tell you, somebody who's looked at the history of impeachment in this country and look at what the framers debated and look at what they relied on in terms of British common law and actual British conduct in the House of Parliaments versus the monarchy, there is no way that this was the intent of anybody. And Nancy Pelosi can quote Benjamin Franklin all she wants, but she's not quoting Benjamin Franklin about impeachment. He almost said nothing about impeachment. She just has platitudes. She obviously went to a Chinese restaurant, opened a fortune cookie, and saw the Benjamin Franklin quote and can't get it out of her small pea brain. Now, due process is necessary. The right to call witnesses is necessary. The right to cross-examine other witnesses is necessary. The right to have counsel is necessary. The right to participate fully in the process is necessary. It's the President of the United States, the House of Representatives, even if the whole House is acting, cannot deny those principled Western civilization ideals if you're going to try and remove a President of the United States, let alone one party, let alone one person, the Speaker of the House. It's a very, very big deal. Now, in this letter, among other things, they point out under Roman 1, your inquiry is constitutionally invalid and violates basic due process rights and the separation of powers. Of course, the president's right. We've talked about this. How does it violate basic separation of powers? Separation of powers exists between the branches of government, not the executive branch and one committee or a handful of committees under the Democrats in the House of Representatives. So the way the courts have seen this in the past, separation of powers might involve, say, the executive branch and one house of Congress, certainly both houses of Congress, but not one committee of Congress or a handful of committees of Congress. In other words, separation of powers is not the doctrine of the executive branch vis-a-vis the Democrat Party. It's the executive branch and institution vis-a-vis another institution, both houses of Congress or one house of Congress. This is why they're not issuing subpoenas for the most part, because they're afraid they won't be able to enforce them in federal court, because courts have made this point. So they're issuing letters, again, for the most part. And then they're saying if the administration doesn't comply with their letters, not subpoenas, their letters, they will include this as an obstruction of justice charge in the impeachment charges. First of all, Congress, the House, Pelosi, doesn't get to accuse somebody of obstruction of justice. The technical phrase would be obstruction of Congress or obstruction of the House. This is not about the justice system. And yet they're loosely throwing these phrases around because they know with the media as is today, they can get away with it. There's no obstruction of justice issue here. There's no obstruction of Congress issue here. There's no obstruction of the House issue here, since the House is not formally or officially involved in this process. Nancy Pelosi has cut the House out. We were the first to raise this, and I will continue to point it out. And I am thrilled that the lawyers over at the White House are listening to what we have to say over here, although this is such basic stuff, quite frankly. Due process rights. In every past case involving a President of the United States and a House of Representatives and a resolution of impeachment inquiry, the rules of the House have provided for a fulsome ability of the President of the United States, the head of the executive branch, to participate in the process. Under Nancy Pelosi's fascistic fiat, the President of the United States has no ability, none whatsoever, to participate in this process. None. None. It's interesting to hear the reporting on this. It's been as lousy as the reporting is on everything else, that the President of the United States is creating a constitutional crisis, that the President of the United States is obstructing a House impeachment inquiry, that the President of the United States is doing this or that. Even on some of our favorite websites. Their headlines are BS. Nancy Pelosi brought us down this path, not the President of the United States. Nancy Pelosi. The Republicans are mostly cut out of the process as well. They're not able to subpoena witnesses. In the past, the minority party has. In the last only three presidential impeachment inquiries. They're not allowed to conduct the kind of investigative activity that the Democrats are. Now, there is no legitimate basis, as they point out, for an impeachment inquiry. None. President hasn't committed any high crimes or misdemeanors. No bribery, no treason. They're working overtime to try and figure out some argument. And so I thought I would take a few minutes in the opening of this program after the break to go through some of what we know, some of the highlights involving Ukraine. They used to talk about Russia for 2.5 years. They used to talk about the Mueller report. They used to talk about Volume 2 of the Mueller report. They used to demand grand jury information. They have failed on every single front. So now it's Ukraine. And they don't intend to fail this time, you see, because they are going to violate the procedures that have been in place in the House of Representatives for Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton. It is they who are eviscerating our system of law. It is they who need to be held to account. And so we're going to circle back and we're going to look at this Ukraine matter. And we're going to do it in a very interesting, I think, simple to follow, entertaining way. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.